It started innocently enough, as most fairy tales do. I had just moved into my new apartment in a quiet neighborhood, excited to embrace the peace and solitude. The first few weeks were blissfully uneventful, and I quickly settled into my routine, but then, strange things began to happen at night. The first time I saw her, it was around midnight. I had just finished binge-watching a series and was about to head to bed when I felt a sudden chill. Instinctively, I glanced towards the window, and that's when I saw her, a woman, standing in the shadows, her face barely visible but her eyes unmistakably locked onto mine. She stood perfectly still, watching. At first, I thought she might be a neighbor taking a late-night stroll, albeit an odd one. I closed the curtains, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling, and went to bed. The next night, she was there again, and the next. It quickly became apparent that this wasn't a coincidence. Every night, without fail, she would appear at my window, her dark silhouette a stark contrast against the dim streetlight. Her presence became a nightly dread. I tried everything, closing the blinds, turning off the lights, even moving to a different room, but nothing worked. No matter where I went or what I did, I felt her eyes following me. One night, my curiosity and fear got the best of me, and I decided to confront her. Armed with a flashlight and a shaky resolve, I stepped outside, my heart pounding in my chest. The cold night air bit at my skin as I walked around to the side of my apartment where she usually stood. But when I got there, she was gone. I shone the flashlight around, but there was no sign of her. Feeling both relieved and unnerved, I went back inside, hoping that my confrontation had scared her off. But the next night, she was back, closer this time. Her face was still hidden in the shadows, but her presence felt even more oppressive. I called the police, explaining the situation. They arrived quickly, but after searching the area, they found nothing. No signs of a woman, no footprints, nothing. They suggested I install security cameras and assured me they would keep an eye on the neighborhood. I followed their advice, setting up cameras around my apartment. For a few nights, things seemed to return to normal. I began to sleep more soundly, reassured by the watchful eyes of the cameras. Then, one night, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was a notification from the security system motion detected. With trembling hands, I opened the app and checked the live feed. There she was, standing in the same spot, looking directly into the camera. Her face was still obscured, but this time, she held something in her hand. It was a small, worn-out book. She raised it slowly, almost reverently, before dropping it to the ground and disappearing into the darkness. The police arrived again, and this time they found the book. It was old, the cover worn and faded. Inside, it was filled with strange symbols and writings I couldn't understand. The officers took it as evidence, promising to investigate further, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. To them, it was just an old book, nothing more. Desperation began to set in. My sleep was restless, plagued by nightmares of the woman and the book. Every night, I dreaded looking out the window, fearing I would see her again. I tried to learn about the book, scouring the internet for any information, but found nothing concrete. My once peaceful haven had become a place of fear and paranoia. One night, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag, intending to stay with a friend until the situation was resolved. As I was leaving, I glanced at the window one last time. She was there, but this time, something was different. She stepped closer, into the light, and for the first time, I saw her face. It was gaunt and pale, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. She mouthed something, but I couldn't hear her. She raised her hand, pointing at the book in the corner of the room, then slowly faded away. I stood there, frozen, trying to comprehend what I had just witnessed. I left that night, but the memory of the strange woman never left me. I later learned that the previous tenant had been an avid collector of occult books and had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The book, it seemed, held some dark connection to her. To this day, I wonder if she was trying to warn me, or if she was seeking something that had been lost to her in life. My new apartment is far away from Elmwood, and I no longer have a window facing the street. But every night, as I close my eyes, I can't help but feel those hollow eyes watching, waiting.
When I moved to Elmwood, I was thrilled by the quaint charm of the neighborhood. The tree-lined streets, friendly neighbors, and small local businesses gave it a cozy, welcoming vibe. But there was one place that stood out: a small, decrepit shop at the corner of Maple Street and Pine Avenue. It looked like it hadn't been open in years, its windows dusty, and its sign faded. The locals referred to it as the Cursed Shop. I had always been skeptical of supernatural stories, chalking them up to overactive imaginations, but the shop intrigued me. No one ever talked about what had happened there, only warning me to stay away. As someone who prided themselves on logic and reason, I decided to investigate and find out the truth. One rainy Saturday afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. Armed with a flashlight and my camera, I made my way to the shop. The door was slightly ajar, and with a push, it creaked open. The inside was musty, filled with dusty shelves and old, faded merchandise. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped inside, but I brushed it off as a draft. The air was thick with an unidentifiable smell, a mix of mildew and something metallic. I walked slowly, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I took out my flashlight and started examining the shelves. Old books, peculiar trinkets, and antique jars lined the walls, each covered in a thick layer of dust. As I reached for an old, leather-bound book, a loud crash echoed from the back of the shop. I froze, my heart racing. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. There was no response. Gathering my courage, I walked toward the sound. The back of the shop was even darker, and the smell grew stronger. I found a small storage room with a door that was slightly ajar. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open. Inside, I found a small, dimly lit room cluttered with strange objects, old dolls, rusted tools, and jars filled with murky liquids. In the center of the room was a table with a dusty, ornate box on it. The box seemed out of place, almost as if it were calling to me. I approached it slowly, feeling an inexplicable sense of dread. As I reached out to open the box, the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath came out in frosty puffs, and I could see my reflection in the glass jars. I hesitated, but my curiosity got the better of me. I opened the box and found a small, intricately carved mirror inside. The moment I touched it, a cold, clammy hand grasped my wrist. I screamed and pulled back, dropping the mirror. It shattered on the floor, and a dark, shadowy figure emerged from the shards. The figure was tall and menacing, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. I stumbled back, my mind racing with terror. The figure moved closer, its presence suffocating. "You should not have come here," it whispered in a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of the shop. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for breath in the pouring rain. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. I would find objects moved in my apartment, hear whispers in the dead of night, and feel a constant, oppressive presence. I realized that whatever I had encountered in the shop had followed me home. Desperate, I sought out information about the shop's history. I learned that it had once been owned by a man named Elias Blackwood, who was rumored to practice dark magic. He disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and since then, everyone who entered the shop had experienced strange and terrifying events. Determined to rid myself of the curse, I returned to the shop with the broken mirror. I placed it back in the box and said a prayer, hoping to appease whatever spirit I had disturbed. As I left, I felt a sense of relief, but the memory of that cold, clammy hand still haunts me. To this day, I avoid the cursed shop and warn others to do the same. The once skeptical part of me now believes that some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some places are best left undisturbed. The cursed shop in my neighborhood remains a chilling reminder of the dangers of curiosity and the dark secrets that lie hidden in plain sight.
When I first moved into Maplewood, it seemed like the perfect suburban neighborhood. Lush green lawns, friendly neighbors, and quiet streets made it the ideal place to start afresh. However, there was one street that stood out like a sore thumb: Blackwood Avenue. It was an unassuming road, yet everyone seemed to avoid it. I didn't think much of it until one fateful night when curiosity got the better of me. One evening, after a particularly stressful day at work, I decided to take a walk to clear my mind. As I strolled through the neighborhood, the setting sun cast long shadows, giving the streets an eerie ambience. Without realizing it, I found myself standing at the entrance of Blackwood Avenue. The street was darker than the others, the trees densely packed, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers. A cold breeze rustled the leaves, sending a chill down my spine. I hesitated but then shrugged off the unease and started walking down the deserted street. The further I walked, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The houses here were older, with peeling paint and overgrown yards. It felt like a forgotten part of town, a stark contrast to the rest of Maplewood. As I walked, I noticed something peculiar. There were no sounds. No chirping of crickets, no rustling of leaves, just an eerie silence that seemed to swallow all noise. I began to feel uneasy, my footsteps sounding unnaturally loud on the cracked pavement. About halfway down the street, I saw a figure standing under a flickering street lamp. As I got closer, I realized it was an old woman, her face obscured by a tattered hood. She seemed to be muttering to herself, her voice a barely audible whisper. Against my better judgment, I approached her, intending to ask if she needed help. "Are you all right?" I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the oppressive silence. She slowly turned to face me, and I felt a shiver of dread. Her eyes were milky white, devoid of life, yet they seemed to bore into my soul. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't understand. Suddenly, she let out a piercing scream that echoed down the street, and I stumbled back, my heart racing. I turned and ran, not daring to look back. The silence was now filled with a cacophony of whispers, each one urging me to flee. I reached the end of Blackwood Avenue, panting and terrified, and glanced back. The old woman was gone, and the street was dark and empty once more. I hurried home, my mind racing with questions. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the encounter. I asked my neighbors about Blackwood Avenue, but they all seemed reluctant to talk about it. One elderly man, Mr. Thompson, finally relented and told me the story. According to him, Blackwood Avenue had been cursed for decades. Strange accidents, mysterious disappearances, and eerie sightings were commonplace there. The old woman I had seen was rumored to be a spirit, the last remnant of a family that had perished in a fire long ago. Despite my fear, I felt compelled to uncover the truth. I spent hours researching in the local library, digging through old newspapers and town records. The stories I found were chilling: accounts of children vanishing, people driven mad by whispers, and unexplained deaths. It seemed that everyone who ventured too far into the mysteries of Blackwood Avenue met a grim fate. One night, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I decided to return to Blackwood Avenue. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of dread, I walked down the cursed street once more. The air was thick with foreboding, the silence almost deafening. As I reached the spot where I had seen the old woman, my flashlight flickered and went out. Panic set in, but I forced myself to stay calm. I heard the whispers again, louder this time, almost intelligible. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder and turned to see the old woman standing behind me, her eyes glowing in the dark. She whispered something I couldn't understand, and a wave of terror washed over me. I ran, my heart pounding, not stopping until I reached the safety of my home. That night, I realized that some mysteries are better left unsolved. The cursed street in my neighborhood held secrets too dark and dangerous to uncover. I never returned to Blackwood Avenue, and to this day, the memory of that eerie, cursed street haunts me.